The Trump administration is now putting a 10% tax, aka tariff, on pretty much everything it brings in from other countries, including stuff from Africa. When these powerhouses make rules like this, right, it ends up hurting the smaller African economies. But we're talking possible production cuts, right, job losses and economic strain. Africa has every right to trade how it sees fit. God willing, I trust and believe with wisdom and smarts, it could pan out just okay for Africa in the long run. Okay, diaspora, so we're about to dive into something that doesn't always make headlines, but definitely shakes the global table. Tariffs on African nations. Lately, we've seen smaller African countries feeling the pressure from this 10% baseline tariff policy the US is rolling out and causing a wave of uncertainty across companies and economies on the continent. But let's quickly break this down. While the move is being praised by some in the US as a way to protect domestic jobs, well, for Africa, this could signal something even bigger. Could this be the push we need to start trading more with each other, building stronger regional economies, and finally stop outsourcing our power? In this episode, I'll unpack what these new tariffs really mean, how they shift the U.S. Africa relationship, and why, despite the noise, this might just be the beginning of a new self-reliant Africa. A new Africa could be rising. I don't know. More Kasa coming up on today's show with no bias, no lies, real Vim, real Kasa. It's time to consider PayAngel. Use our code Kasa, a platform designed by Africans tailored specifically to our unique needs. Gen Z, we need services that get us, and PayAngel does. PayAngel understands our needs, offering the best exchange rates and super fast transactions. Whether you're sending money to family or paying for business, it's all about convenience and trust. Plus, with PayAngel's easy-to-use app, you get more for your money and it's always safe. To experience the best service and value, use our code Kasa when downloading and transferring. Remember, use our code Kasa now. PayAngel, global payments, local simplicity. Now, let me break it down. I'm going to break it down for the viewers who don't really know exactly what tariffs are, what they mean, how it affects Africa, how it's affecting the global stance. But an article from Al Jazeera brings us this question. Have Trump's tariffs killed U.S. Africa preferential trade? And I think the answer is a solid yes. So here's what's going on. The Trump administration is now putting a 10% tax, aka tariff, on pretty much everything it brings in from other countries, including stuff from Africa. On top of that, they're hitting certain countries harder, right? Like Nigeria and South Africa, with even bigger taxes referred to as reciprocal tariffs. Because they're seen as the worst offenders in trade, quoted by Al Jazeera, Trump claims these countries have treated us badly. African countries most definitely will be looked at as the worst offenders compared to the rest of the world in trade, even because they don't buy as much from the US. The US looks at how much it buys from a country versus how much that country buys from them. If a country sells a lot of goods to the US like oil, minerals, clothing, or food, but doesn't buy much back, the US sees that as unfair. Kind of like, yo, we're spending a lot of money on you guys, but you guys are not spending enough or supporting our businesses in return. In this case, Nigeria exports a lot of oil and goods to the US. South Africa, on the other hand, also exports minerals, cars, and agriculture products. But from the US point of view, these countries aren't importing enough American products in return. So instead of seeing it as a balanced relationship, Trump thinks Africa is getting the better end of the deal, which I think in reality we are, right? Which is why they slap these extra taxes to level the playing field. But here's the flip side. Africa has every right to trade how it sees fit. Matter of fact, Africa doesn't necessarily need much from the US in terms of minerals and resources. We have it all. We know this. We have most of it. Honestly speaking, the issue is when these powerhouses make rules like this, right, it ends up hurting the smaller African economies that rely on those exports. The smaller African economies like Lesotho, according to BBC News Africa, at the very top. Lesotho is taking a massive blow with 50% tariff. Half of their exports to the US are now basically being taxed. Right behind them, Madagascar is facing 47%, Mauritius 40%, and Botswana 37%. Angola is hit with 32%, Libya 31%, and both South Africa and Algeria are looking at around 30%. Tunisia at 28%, and then we have Ivory Coast rounds out to the top 10 with 21%. Then we have Nigeria at 14%, followed closely by Equatorial Guinea and Chad at 13%, and Cameroon at 11%. From there, we see a wave of East and West African countries, DR Congo at 11%, and Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, South Sudan, Comoros, Ghana, Senegal, Gabon, Togo, and so forth, all being slapped with a 10% tariff across the board. These numbers might just look like percentages on paper, but for these countries, especially those heavily dependent on trade with the US, this could mean job cuts, production slowdowns, and serious economic pressure. This is the real impact, right? Now, for years, Africa had this sweet deal with the US called AGOA, short for the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Basically, it let African countries send goods like clothes, food, and raw materials to the US without paying those extra fees, which helped create thousands of jobs across the continent. That deal, AGOA, started in 2000, and it's helped a lot of African businesses grow since then. The theme here, though, is that we're wholeheartedly relying on US trading. Clearly, we've relied on it way too much, and it's now biting us in the butt. And it feels like the end of the world for the continent, doesn't it? Doesn't it feel like the end of the world, right? Because we're depending too much on the West. But now with these new tariffs, that whole agreement could be canceled or pushed aside, meaning it could get way harder and more expensive for African businesses to trade with the US if we're not smart, which is fine. God willing, I trust and believe with wisdom and smarts, it could pan out just okay for Africa in the long run. So now let me go into what this means for Africa, right? We shouldn't be too concerned with how much tariffs the orange man puts on Africa, because if we're smart, this shift in US trade policy could, actually benefit us. It could definitely cause some short-term pain, but we're talking possible production cuts, right? Job losses and economic strain, especially in countries that rely heavily on exports to the US. And let's be honest, some Western experts are already betting, right? They're already betting on that, hoping Africa takes the hit so they can keep the upper hand. But here's my take, right? Yes, there may be setbacks, but this could also be the start of something powerful, something big. I'm not just trying to sound optimistic, but this is like a reality check we can step into if we take the right steps, right? Africa holds the resources the world needs. We've always had the value. Now, here's something I really want you guys to pay attention to. After going through those percentages and tax, right? When we look at all these African countries getting slammed one by one by these new US tariffs, Lesotho, Madagascar, Niger, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, so forth, there's something very interesting missing that I realized. You don't see Mali, you don't see Niger, and you don't see Burkina Faso. Why is that? We're so caught up with the fact that we're being taxed and all hell breaks loose. The end of the world. What are our mates doing? What are our fellow mates doing that's different? Why are they not getting taxed? These three countries make up what's called the Alliance of Sahel States, or the AES, however you want to call it. And the reason why they're not on this list is simple. They don't rely on the US. Imports or exports like that, they don't rely on it. They're not out here begging to be a part of the Western trade game. They've started taking care of themselves, building trade systems among themselves, and focusing on regional strength rather than foreign dependence. Now, that should really make us think. These countries have been heavily sanctioned and isolated by the West, yet they're not the ones feeling the pain of the tariffs right now. Why? Because they've been learning how to stand on their own. Meanwhile, Some of our so-called stronger economies in Africa are the ones suffering from the most, horrendous tariffs because we've become too dependent on systems that were never designed to favor us in the first place. What if we took a page out of the AES playbook? What if we actually strengthened our regional trade, built our own internal economies, and stopped leaning so heavily on the West? This could be our wake-up call. The proof is right here. Those who rely less on outside validation are the ones standing strong when the global wind shifts. What we need now is to trade with each other, not slap each other with massive tariffs like outsiders do. Instead, in Africa, instead of copying the model of heavy tariffs on each other, we should be doing the opposite. Other regions like Europe and China, we see, are already making moves to protect their own economies, prioritizing internal trade and partnerships. Africa needs to create systems that make it easy for us to trade among ourselves. While Europe and China are moving fast to protect their own interests and strengthen internal trade, Africa can do the same. Africa must do the same. So I ask, why can't Africa do the same? Why can't we strengthen our own trade networks, build within, circulate wealth across our borders? Why not Africa? Why not now? We don't need to rely on handouts or one-sided trade deals. We have the resources, we have the people, we have brilliant minds, we have the power. Let's not wait for anyone to empower us. We empower each other. The impact of these tariffs might feel heavy now, but it could spark a long overdue shift toward African economic dependence, unity, and growth. Because whether the world wants to admit it or not, God has blessed us with resources. We carry the value and we carry the future. A new Africa is rising. And it starts with how we respond to this in this moment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was great talking with you. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Be blessed, be vigilant, and stay tuned for the next episode on The Real Kasa Show. Hey viewers, if you're looking for some amazing West African cuisines in New Jersey, visit Legit African Touch at 52 Ferry Street, South River, New Jersey. Mama's Secret, only continental dishes, preferably Ghanaian or Nigerian dishes, all in Legit African Touch. Get a feel of the African touch now. What up, viewers of The Real Kasa Show? Make sure to follow The Real Kasa Show on X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok as well.
The Real Kasa Show.